The night settled over the Crossline estate like a velvet curtain, soft but heavy, and Aria Wynn could feel every ounce of its weight pressing into her chest as she stood alone in the grand bridal suite, her fingers trembling around the thin silver bracelet her mother once slipped onto her wrist with a whispered promise that she'd never face darkness alone. But tonight, Aria felt very, very alone. The suite was too big, too golden, too silent. Crystal chandeliers dripping warm light across marble floors, silk curtains billowing with a faint draft, a king-size bed she couldn't bring herself to look at, because even though this marriage was only ink and signatures, the word wedding still echoed in her ears like a bell that didn't belong to her. She pulled in a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, trying to remember that this wasn't romance, wasn't destiny. This was survival, a contract she signed with hands that shook so badly the pen almost slipped, a deal to save her mother, a deal with a man she barely knew. Damian Cross. Even his name felt like something carved into stone. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet click of the door, the deliberate footsteps of a man who carried authority without ever needing to raise his voice. Aria's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. She wasn't ready. Not for him. Not for the night. Not for the truth that she had stepped into a life she didn't understand. His reflection slid into view in the tall mirror before her. Damian stood just a few feet away, broad-shouldered in a tailored black suit. His tie loosened as if he'd pulled it at the moment he escaped the chaotic reception downstairs. His expression was unreadable, the kind of stillness that came from years of being observed, judged, and obeyed. But his eyes, dark, focused, unsettlingly calm, were fixed on her. "Aria," he said softly, and the way her name shaped itself in his voice made her pulse stutter. She forced herself to meet his eyes in the mirror, not fully turning, just enough to acknowledge him, enough to pretend she wasn't unraveling from the inside. "I know this is overwhelming," Damian added, stepping closer until she felt the warmth of him at her back, a contrast to the cold panic blooming beneath her skin. "It's overwhelming because none of this is normal," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "2 hours ago, I was nobody. Now I'm—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the word wife, couldn't say the name she now legally carried, Aria Cross, because none of it felt like hers. Damian didn't interrupt. He didn't move closer, didn't touch her. But the air between them shifted, charged with something quiet, something careful. He leaned in, breath brushing her ear, voice dropping into a low, steady murmur that slipped under her ribs and wrapped around her spine. "Trust me, just tonight." The whisper hit her harder than it should have. Not because it sounded romantic, but because it sounded almost human, almost vulnerable, like he wasn't telling her to trust the CEO, or the contract, or the walls he built. He was asking her to trust the man beneath it all, the man she knew nothing about. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the bracelet. Her heart thudded in a rhythm that didn't feel like fear anymore, more like anticipation, confusion, something dangerously close to hope. She finally turned to face him fully, and for a fleeting second, she saw something unguarded in Damian's eyes. Not power, not coldness, but a flicker of sincerity that didn't match the reputation of a man rumored to make decisions with ice in his veins. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," he answered, and the honesty in those 3 words surprised her. The silence stretched, warm and fragile, until he stepped back just enough to give her space. "But we'll get through tonight," he said. "And tomorrow, we figure out the rest." Aria exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath since the moment he entered the room. She didn't know if she trusted him. She didn't know if she could. But she knew one thing. She wasn't facing this night alone. And somewhere in the quiet hum of her heartbeat, something softened. If this story moves you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Aria lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching this time, and whispered, "Okay." And in that single word, the night finally began. Morning light crept across the Crossline estate like a slow confession, brushing the edges of the penthouse windows with a pale gold that made everything look softer. Then it felt, and Aria Wynn woke with the disorienting sense that she had stepped into someone else's life. A life made of marble floors, crisp linens, and a last name she still wasn't used to hearing. She sat up slowly, realizing she had fallen asleep on top of the covers. Still wearing the silk robe the house staff insisted she change into after the wedding. And for a moment she forgot where she was, forgot what she had agreed to, forgot the weight of the ring sitting on her finger like a small moon with gravity she didn't understand. Then she saw the suit jacket draped neatly over the armchair across the room, the one Damian had shrugged off last night before disappearing to the guest suite, and everything rushed back like cold water. The contract, the whisper, the promise she wasn't sure she could believe. Aria let out a shaky breath, rubbing her palms against her thighs to steady herself, then slid off the bed and padded across the cool floor toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below, glittering like a kingdom she wasn't meant to rule, and as she pressed her fingertips to the glass, she wondered how someone could be surrounded by so much beauty and still feel like they were standing in the middle of a storm. A soft knock broke the quiet. She stiffened, turning just as the door cracked open and Damian appeared, still buttoning the cuffs of his shirt, hair slightly tousled in a way she'd never seen on a billionaire whose life seemed sculpted with precision. "Good morning," he said, voice calm, too calm, as if he were trying not to disrupt the fragile air between them. "Did you sleep at all?" Aria nodded, though they both knew it was barely true. "Some." He studied her for a second longer than necessary, eyes catching on the bracelet at her wrist, the one she had clutched like a lifeline the night before. "We have a meeting with the board at 11, he said. "It's mostly procedural. They'll expect us to arrive together." "Because of the contract," she murmured. His jaw tightened by a fraction. "Because you're my wife." The word hit harder than she expected, not because it sounded romantic, but because it sounded heavier coming from him, like he didn't say it lightly, like he didn't let many people have that place in his orbit. "Right?" she whispered, unsure what else to say. She expected him to turn and leave, the conversation done, the day already scheduled down to the minute the way CEOs lived, but Damian didn't move. Instead, he stepped inside the room fully and closed the door behind him, his expression shifting into something she hadn't seen before, uncertainty, just faint, like an echo of last night's honesty. "Aria," he said quietly, "about yesterday, about everything. I know this is a lot. And I know you didn't choose this life. You chose survival." Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't even distant in that moment. He was just real. And somehow that scared her more than the cold version of him she had prepared herself for. "I'll do my part," she said softly. "I won't make things harder for you." His gaze flicked to hers, sharp but gentle. "I don't want a performance. I just need you to feel safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign in this golden cage of a penthouse, in a marriage built on paperwork instead of history, but Damian's voice softened the edges of it. "If you ever need anything," he added, "you come to me first. Not the staff. Not Mira. Me." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you're my responsibility," he said, and though his tone was calm, the words carried a gravity she wasn't prepared for. Responsibility. It should have sounded cold, transactional, but coming from him, it felt strangely protective, like a vow he wasn't sure how to express any other way. A soft chime echoed through the suite, the automated reminder of his schedule, and Damian exhaled slowly. "I have a call in 10 minutes, he said, stepping back toward the door. "But I'll have breakfast sent up. Eat something. We have a long day ahead." Aria nodded, watching as he paused with his hand on the doorknob, glanced back at her once more, and then left without another word. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same kind as before. It wasn't empty. It wasn't cold. It lingered with the weight of something unspoken, something shifting, something she couldn't name yet. Aria touched the bracelet on her wrist, drew a breath that felt steadier than the one before, and whispered into the quiet. "I can do this, right?" But the question wasn't for the room. It was for herself. And somewhere deeper than fear, a small voice whispered back, "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." Breakfast arrived on a silver tray that looked more expensive than Aria's entire rented apartment had ever been, carried by a house staff member who moved with the silent precision of someone trained to serve royalty, not contract wives with trembling hands and sleep-heavy eyes. She whispered a thank you as the woman set everything down. Fresh berries, warm croissants, eggs cooked perfectly, steam curling from a porcelain cup of coffee. But the moment the door shut, Aria stood frozen, staring at the food as though it might shatter beneath her gaze. She wasn't used to abundance. She wasn't used to being cared for. And she definitely wasn't used to eating breakfast alone in a penthouse suite that felt like someone else's dream. She forced herself to take a bite, then another, because today mattered, because the board meeting was real, because she had promised Damian she wouldn't fall apart. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Mira. Are you alive? And do rich people smell different? Call me. Aria almost laughed, a quiet, startled sound, before typing back. I'll call tonight. Wish me luck. Big debt. Big day didn't begin to cover it. By the time she slipped into the navy dress the stylist laid out, a simple, elegant piece she barely recognized herself in, her stomach was a fluttering knot of nerves. She smoothed her hands down the fabric, forcing them to stop shaking, and stepped into the hallway where Damian waited. He looked different today. Still powerful, still impossibly composed, but there was a rawness in his eyes as they swept over her. Not desire, not surprise, something gentler. Relief, maybe. You look good, he said, and the pause before good made her pulse skip. Thank you, she breathed. Your stylist picked everything. Still, he murmured. It suits you. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, tense in a way she couldn't name. Damian stood beside her, not touching, not imposing, yet his presence filled the space, steady as a heartbeat. When the doors slid open, the hum of cross-lined towers swallowed them whole. Glass, steel, commanding energy. Employees straightened as Damian walked past, nodding with crisp respect, but their gazes slid to Aria with curiosity sharpened to needles. Wide eyes, whispered guesses, murmurs behind sleek laptops. Is that her? The wife. She's so normal. Normal. The word stung more than it should have. Damian must have noticed her shoulders stiffen. Without breaking stride, he leaned closer and said under his breath, ignore them. Easy for him to say. He didn't feel like an exhibit being rolled into a museum full of people waiting to see if she was worthy of the pedestal she never asked for. When they entered the boardroom, Aria felt the temperature drop. 12 executives sat around a long obsidian table, their expressions carved from suspicion and polished disdain. Soulin Ward, sleek black suit, red lipstick like a warning sign, turned her chair with slow, deliberate precision. Mr. Cross, she purred. And Mrs. Cross. How unexpected. Damian didn't flinch. Let's begin. Papers rustled. Screens lit. But every so often, Aria felt Soulin's gaze slide over her like a razor dipped in honey. Halfway through the meeting, Soulin finally struck. Mrs. Cross, she said brightly, loud enough to cut through the discussion. Perhaps you'd like to share how you and Damian met? It's such a whirlwind romance, after all. Aria froze. Damian's jaw tightened. This wasn't curiosity. This was a trap. It's personal, Damian said flatly. But Soulin smiled a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Everything about you is personal, Damian. The board deserves transparency, don't you think? The room waited, hungry. Aria lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. We met by chance. And sometimes chance is enough. Soulin blinked. She hadn't expected grace. She'd expected fear. Aria didn't look at Damian, but she felt when he did. Felt the weight of his attention. Felt something warm flicker in the cold boardroom air. When the meeting adjourned, Soulin cornered Aria near the exit, her heels clicking like a countdown. Word of advice, she said sweetly, leaning closer. This world eats girls like you alive. Aria met her gaze, pulse hammering but unbroken. I'm not here to be eaten. Soulin's smile thinned. We'll see. Damian appeared behind her, voice slicing the space clean. Aria, we're leaving. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet until Aria finally whispered. She hates me. She hates me. Damian corrected. You're just collateral. That's comforting, she muttered, and to her shock, he laughed, short, real, the first she'd heard from him. You handled yourself well, he said. Better than I expected. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. The elevator reached their floor. Aria stepped out, feeling strangely lighter, strangely stronger. Maybe Soulin was right. Maybe this world did eat girls like her alive. But maybe, just maybe, Aria Wynn wasn't as breakable as she looked. Aria had barely stepped back into the penthouse when the weight of the entire morning settled on her shoulders, heavy but strangely electrifying, like walking out of a storm and realizing she was still standing. She slipped off her heels by the door, letting her toes sink into the plush carpet, and for a moment she simply breathed, long, steady, determined, because despite every glare, every whispered judgment, every calculated strike from Soulin Ward, she hadn't broken. She could almost hear Myra's voice in her head. "See? Told you. You're tougher than you think." Aria allowed herself one small smile before wandering into the living room, where a floor-to-ceiling window poured late-morning light across polished hardwood and sleek gray furniture. She wasn't used to beautiful spaces being this quiet. In her old apartment, the fridge hummed like an old man clearing his throat, the pipes rattled whenever the upstairs neighbor showered, and every second held some tiny sound of life. Here, silence felt like a luxury and a warning. Her fingers drifted to the bracelet on her wrist, grounding her. She didn't hear Damian enter. She only sensed the shift in the room, the subtle change in air pressure, the presence of someone who moved with too much control to ever make real noise. "You handled Soulin better than I expected," he said from behind her. "Is that supposed to be praise?" Aria asked, turning to face him. Damian's tie was loosened, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, an unexpectedly human look that made him seem less like a billionaire and more like a man wrestling an empire with his bare hands. "It's supposed to be the truth," he replied. He stepped closer, but not too close, always giving her just enough space to breathe. Most people don't stand their ground with her. They fold. "I almost did," Aria admitted. "But then I realized she wanted that." Damian's eyes flickered with something, surprise? Respect? But he didn't comment. Instead, he walked past her, stopping at the window, hands slipping into his pockets as he looked out over the city. "Soulin has been waiting for a reason to undermine me," he said quietly. "Your presence gives her a new angle, one she's eager to exploit." The words shouldn't have stung. After all, this marriage wasn't real, but they did. "I didn't ask for this spotlight." "I know." He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the tension in his jaw. "But I'm not going to let her use you as ammunition." Aria blinked, startled by the quiet conviction in his tone. "Why?" His gaze met hers, steady, unreadable, intense. "Because I said I'd make sure you were safe. And I meant it. Safety. That word again. Soft but solid. A promise wrapped in steel." Before Aria could figure out what to do with the warmth it sparked in her chest, Damian's phone vibrated sharply on the counter. He sighed, checked the screen, and his expression hardened. "CFO emergency?" she guessed. "Something like that," he muttered. He typed a quick response, tension flowing back into his shoulders like muscle memory. "I need to go downstairs for a few hours. Some documents need sorting." "Do you want me there?" she asked carefully. Damian hesitated, not dismissing, not rejecting, just thinking. "Not today," he decided. "Today, focus on settling in. This place is yours now, Aria. Treat it like it. Hers. The penthouse. The space. The life." She wasn't sure she could ever see it that way, but she nodded. Damian grabbed his jacket from the armchair, pausing at the door. "If you need anything," he said, "call me. Don't hesitate." As soon as he left, silence returned, but it felt different, less like emptiness, more like possibility. Aria wandered through the penthouse, exploring rooms she hadn't dared to step into before. A private library with dark shelves and soft leather chairs. A kitchen bigger than the entire floor of her old apartment. A terrace overlooking the city, the wind teasing her hair as she stepped into the open air. She let the breeze cool her nerves, let the height remind her how far she had come, and how far she still had to go. The sound of a doorbell made her jump. A delivery. When she opened the door, a florist handed her a bouquet, white lilies wrapped in elegant black ribbon. Aria frowned. "I didn't order anything. Mr. Cross did," the florist said with a polite nod before leaving. Her heart stumbled. Tucked among the lilies was a small card with Damian's handwriting, clean, precise, unexpectedly gentle. "For when today feels heavier than it should. D." Aria pressed the flowers to her chest, swallowing the sudden ache behind her ribs. Maybe the marriage was a contract. Maybe the world saw her as a pawn. Maybe Soulin was right about how brutal this place could be. But Damian Cross, cold, unreadable, impossible Damian, had sent her flowers. And for the first time since signing her name on that contract, Aria felt the faintest spark of something new. Not trust, Not yet, but the beginning of something dangerously close. Aria set the bouquet gently on the marble counter, the white lilies glowing against the muted gray of the penthouse like small lanterns guiding her through a world she still didn't quite understand. She traced Damian's handwriting on the card, clean, steady strokes that somehow felt more intimate than the flowers themselves. And for a moment, she just stood there, letting the unexpected warmth of the gesture settle beneath her ribs. No one had sent her flowers before. Not for a birthday, not for a holiday, not even as an apology. Certainly not as a quiet acknowledgement that her day had been hard. She inhaled, the faint scent of lilies easing something tight in her chest, and placed the card carefully in her pocket, as if it were something fragile that might disappear if she let it out of her sight. She needed fresh air, or space, or something. The terrace called her again, a wide stretch of slate stone and glass railing with the city sprawled beneath like a glittering map. Aria stepped outside, feeling the cool wind brush her face, and leaned on the railing, letting her thoughts unravel. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until the terrace door slid open with a soft hiss. She turned, startled, to see a tall man in his late 50s stepping out, dressed in a dark suit and wearing a kind smile behind silver-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Cross?" he asked politely. Aria blinked. "Yes." He bowed his head slightly. "I'm Harold, head of security for Mr. Cross. He asked me to check in and ensure you're settling in well." Aria wasn't used to people checking on her, especially not ones who looked like they managed entire security teams. I'm okay," she said quickly. "Really?" Harold studied her for a moment, the wind tugging at his tie. "You're brave," he said softly. "Most newcomers find this world overwhelming." "Is it that obvious?" she asked, cheeks warming. "Not at all," Harold replied. "But I've worked with Mr. Cross for 9 years. I know the storms he's had to weather, and I know when someone new is learning to navigate them." Aria's breath caught. "Harold, is he always like this?" Harold's smile softened. "He wasn't always." He paused, as if weighing what he could say. "Mr. Cross lost his father young. Took over Crossline at 26. He's been fighting to keep the company together ever since. Trust isn't a luxury he's had." That explained the walls, the distance, the restraint in every word Damian spoke. Harold continued, "But sending flowers? That's new. I've never seen him do that for anyone." Aria felt her pulse skip before she could stop it. It was just a gesture. "Maybe," Harold said gently. "But from him, it means something." The sliding door opened again. Aria turned, and startled when she saw Damian striding out, jacket off, tie loosened further, the tension from earlier carved deeper into his shoulders. His eyes flicked between her and Harold, something unreadable flashing across his expression before he masked it. "Everything all right out here?" he asked. Harold straightened. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Cross is settling in." Damian nodded, and Harold excused himself, leaving the two of them alone on the terrace, wind curling around them like an invisible thread. Damian stepped closer, stopping beside her at the railing. "He didn't overwhelm you, did he?" "No," Aria said softly. "He was kind." Damian exhaled, relieved. "Good. I rely on him more than most people." Silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but delicate. Aria glanced sideways at him. "You sent me flowers." Damian didn't look at her, but she saw the faint shift in his jaw, a subtle sign of vulnerability she wouldn't have noticed 2 days ago. "You had a hard morning," he said simply. It felt appropriate. "Appropriate?" she echoed, unable to hide the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Damian, they were lilies wrapped in black silk ribbon." The florist insisted. He countered, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. She turned fully toward him, her hair brushing her cheek in the wind. "Thank you," she said, "for the flowers. And for backing me up in the meeting." His eyes finally met hers, steady and dark. "I meant what I said earlier. You don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire." "But I am," she whispered. "Because I'm your wife." Damian's expression didn't flicker, but something in his gaze deepened. "Because you agreed to help me," he corrected. "Because you chose to stand by me when you didn't have to." Aria swallowed, the breeze catching her breath. "The contract said—" "I don't care what the contract said," he interrupted quietly. "I care that you're here." Her heart gave a startled, traitorous flutter. He looked away first, almost as if the admission cost him something. "There's a charity banquet tomorrow evening," he said, reverting to his composed tone. We'll need to attend together. It'll be your first major public appearance. Aria nodded slowly. What do I need to do? Damian paused, eyes drifting back to hers with a softness he didn't seem aware of. Just stay close to me, he said. I'll handle the rest. The wind pressed between them, cool and alive, and Aria realized, slowly, quietly, that something inside her was beginning to shift too, following a rhythm she hadn't meant to step into but couldn't step out of now. And as Damian turned to go back inside, she whispered to herself, barely audible over the city below, stay close to you. I think I can do that. The next evening arrived faster than Aria expected, the city sinking into a deep navy twilight as the penthouse buzzed with the quiet movements of stylists and assistants preparing her for the Crossline Foundation charity banquet. She sat before a mirror framed in soft white bulbs, watching unfamiliar versions of herself take shape. Her hair swept into elegant waves, her makeup subtle but luminous. The navy gown Damian selected fitting her like it had been sewn from starlight and intention. It was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. This wasn't her world, not even close. Yet she was about to walk into it beside a man built for crowds, expectations, and the kind of power that could shift the air when he entered a room. Aria touched her bracelet, half hidden beneath the sleeve of her gown, grounding herself. You're shaking, the stylist murmured gently. Aria exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Big night. You'll be fine, the woman said with quiet certainty. Mr. Cross doesn't bring people he can't trust. Aria blinked at her reflection. Trust. The word tangled strangely in her chest. When the stylist finally left, the room felt too quiet, too bright, too expectant. She stood, smoothing her gown, when she heard the soft click of the door. Damian stepped inside and stopped. For the first time since meeting him, Damian Cross looked stunned. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. In a real way. In a way that made his breath catch, his posture shift, his perfectly controlled expression falter for a single, unguarded heartbeat. Aria, her name formed slowly, as if his mouth needed time to adjust to the new version of her standing under the golden light. His gaze moved over her, not hungrily, not possessively, but carefully, reverently, like he was afraid a sudden movement might break the moment. You look, he paused, searching for a word that didn't exist in his usual vocabulary of boardrooms and briefings. Beautiful. Heat rose in her cheeks. The stylist did everything. No, he said quietly. They didn't. The air changed between them, softened, stretched, holding something neither of them knew how to name yet. Damian offered his arm. Ready? As I'll ever be. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the steady warmth beneath his suit jacket, and the two of them walked toward the elevator like a couple who belonged together, even though they both knew their relationship was stitched with loopholes and expiration dates. The banquet was held at the Grand Aurelius Hotel, a building carved out of light and glass, its ballroom already alive with the glitter of diamonds, tuxedos, and low conversations that floated like smoke. The moment Aria and Damian stepped through the grand entrance, heads turned. Conversations paused. Cameras flashed. And Aria felt the shift, the moment the room realized Damian Cross hadn't arrived alone. Smile. Damian murmured, leaning in just enough for their shoulders to touch. It makes them nervous. She tried, and to her surprise, the smile came easier than expected. Damian guided her through the crowd, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, not pushing, not claiming, just steady, protective, present. Every time someone approached, senators, philanthropists, CEOs, Damian introduced her without hesitation. My wife, Aria. The word wife hit her like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples through places she didn't want to examine too closely. Soulin Ward arrived like a dark storm cloud, her red gown cutting through the room like a warning flare. Mrs. Cross, she said with saccharine sweetness, you clean up well. Damian's voice sharpened instantly. Soulin. Aria held her gaze, refusing to shrink. Mr. Cross's team worked hard to prepare me. Yes, Soulin said, lifting her champagne glass. They'll need to work even harder if you plan on surviving this world for long. Damian stepped forward slightly, a silent barrier between them. Find another target, he warned. Soulin smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Damian. I'm only just getting started. She drifted away, the scent of expensive perfume lingering like smoke. Aria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She really hates me. Forget her, Damian murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She can't touch you. He guided her through the ballroom, but Aria could feel the tension in his shoulders, the weight of things unspoken. As the night progressed, small moments kept catching her off guard. Damian brushing a stray curl behind her ear, Damian pouring her water before she asked, Damian stepping slightly closer whenever the crowd pressed in too tightly. It was easy to forget the contract. Too easy. Near the end of the evening, as the string quartet played softly and the lights dimmed to amber, Damian leaned in. You're doing exceptionally well tonight. Only because you're right here, she admitted before she could stop herself. His eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Aria. But whatever he was about to say was cut short when Harold approached urgently. Mr. Cross, we have a situation. Damian's expression hardened. What kind of situation? Harold's jaw tightened. Someone leaked your marriage contract. The world tilted under Aria's heels. The air vanished from her lungs. And Damian's hand closed around hers, strong and certain, as he whispered, Stay with me. And in that moment, she realized she had no intention of doing anything else. The ballroom seemed to contract around Aria the moment Harold's words hit the air, the glittering chandeliers blurring into a haze as the sound of conversations dimmed, shifted, then sharpened into the unmistakable frequency of scandal. Damian's grip tightened around her hand. Not painful, not panicked, but decisive, anchoring her to something solid while the floor beneath her felt like it was tilting. We're leaving, he said, voice low and controlled, already guiding her toward the nearest exit. Cameras flashed. Whispers sliced through the air. Is it true? A contract marriage? Did he pay her? How long until the board reacts? Aria kept her eyes forward, fighting the urge to curl into herself. Damian moved with sharp purpose, his free hand lifting slightly as if ready to shield her from whatever came next. They reached a side hallway just as the ballroom erupted behind them. Voices rising, footsteps shifting, the unmistakable swell of a story about to explode. Damian, Aria managed, her breath trembling. What do we do? He didn't slow. First, we get you somewhere safe. Safe? She echoed, her pulse thundering. It's just a leak. It's not just a leak, he cut in, eyes blazing with a cold fire she hadn't seen directed at her before. This was timed. Calculated. Someone wanted maximum damage. Soulin. The name slipped out before Aria could stop it. Damian's jaw tightened. Most likely. They reached a private elevator, Harold holding the doors open. Security's sweeping the building, Harold said. Online traffic is already spiking. It's everywhere within minutes. Aria's stomach twisted. People know. They think they know, Damian corrected, pulling her inside the elevator. There's a difference. The doors slid shut, silencing the chaos. But silence didn't help. Aria could still feel her heart racing, still feel the weight of every whisper chasing her up the tower. I ruined everything, she whispered. Damian turned to her sharply, eyes steady. No, listen to me. This is not on you. But the contract was my decision, he interrupted. My creation, my responsibility. You protected me tonight. Now let me do the same. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open to the dim, quiet hallway of the penthouse floor. Harold stepped out first, scanning the area, then nodded. All clear. Damian led Aria inside the penthouse, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than the entire ballroom. The moment they were alone, the silence between them thickened, not empty, but charged with everything neither of them had said yet. Aria pulled her hand from his, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of her together. People are going to think I trapped you, or that you bought me. Damian stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Let them think what they want, he said quietly. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters right now. But your reputation, your company, is already under attack, he finished, voice hardening. Soulin's been waiting for leverage. She thinks this is it. Aria's chest tightened. Is she right? Damian's eyes locked onto hers, dark and steady. Not if I stand my ground. She tried to look away, but he stepped into her line of sight, refusing to let her retreat into fear. Aria, he said, softer now. I told you I'd protect you. I meant it. I won't let this break you. Or us. Her breath hitched. Us. That word didn't belong to their contract, and yet it lingered in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Damian, what happens now? He took a slow breath, his expression sharpening with resolve. Tomorrow morning, there will be a press firestorm. The board will demand answers. Soulin will push for my removal. And what will you tell them? Damian stepped closer until their shadows merged on the floor. The truth, he said. That I chose you. Her heart stumbled. Even if that cost you everything? Some things, he murmured, eyes never leaving hers, are worth the cost. The world outside the penthouse buzzed with rumors and headlines, but inside, under the soft glow of city lights filtering through the windows, Aria felt something shift, a turning point she hadn't expected, a line neither of them could uncross now. And for the first time since the contract was exposed, she didn't feel like she was falling apart. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something real. Morning came with a tension so thick it felt woven into the walls of the cross-lined penthouse, sunlight cutting through the windows in sharp angles as the world beyond erupted in headlines. Aria didn't need to read to feel. She could sense them in every vibration of her phone, every notification piling in like stones on her chest. Contract marriage. Bought bride. Crossline scandal. The words hadn't been spoken aloud, but they echoed in her mind as she stood at the kitchen island, fingers curled around a mug of untouched coffee. She didn't hear Damian enter, but she felt him, felt the shift in the air, the gravity he carried with him like armor. He set his phone on the counter, screen glowing with a storm of messages, and looked at her with a steadiness she didn't understand. It's worse than we thought, he said. Aria swallowed hard. Soulin. She leaked it to the press and the board simultaneously. His jaw flexed. She wants a vote to remove me. By noon. Aria's chest tightened with guilt that wasn't fully hers. Damian, this is happening because of me. No, he said sharply, stepping closer. This is happening because Soulin has no loyalty and no limits. You are not the cause. You're the excuse she's using. Maybe I should speak to them, Aria whispered. Tell the board the truth. Tell them you didn't, Aria. His voice softened. I won't let you stand in front of vultures who want to tear you apart. Her gaze lifted to meet his. Then what can we do? Damian hesitated, a rare crack in his certainty, before taking a slow breath. We fight. He walked to the hallway, returning with a folder thick enough to make her pulse stutter. What's that? She asked. Proof, Damian said, placing it gently on the island. Documents that show Soulin's been working with an outside investor to destabilize Crossline. She wanted leverage. She wanted chaos. She thought our marriage contract would give her both. Aria felt the air rush from her lungs. Damian, this could save you. It could save us, he corrected. But only if the truth comes from both of us. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a smaller envelope. Her name, Aria Cross, was written in his handwriting across the front. What is that? She whispered. Damian stepped closer, something raw flickering behind his composure. My apology, he said. And my choice. Her heart pounded as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, not legal, not cold, not typed. A handwritten statement. His truth. His admission. His responsibility. I created the contract. I initiated the arrangement. Aria Wynn acted out of necessity, not manipulation. She owes me nothing. I owe her everything. Aria's breath trembled. Damian, if you present this, I will. They'll think you're weak. Let them. You could lose Crossline. Damian's eyes didn't waver. I won't lose you. The words hit her like a light breaking open inside her chest. Warm, impossible, undeniable. Damian. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth of him, the sincerity radiating through every inch of the moment. Today, he said softly, I'm done letting fear make my choices for me. Then what choice are you making now? She whispered. Damian looked at her like the world had finally stopped spinning long enough for him to see clearly. You, he said. I choose you. Her breath caught, not because she was unprepared, but because some part of her had been waiting for those words without realizing it. And when he reached for her hand, slow, gentle, reverent, Aria didn't pull away. She stepped closer. Then we faced them together, she said. Damian nodded once, firm and certain. Together. And as he led her toward the door, toward the boardroom, toward Soulin, toward the firestorm waiting for them, Aria knew this was no longer about a contract, or survival, or scandal. This was a declaration, a line drawn, a turning point, and she wasn't afraid anymore. The boardroom was waiting for them like a storm waiting for lightning, silent on the surface, but charged so heavily that Aria could feel the pressure in her ribs as she and Damian stepped inside. 12 executives sat stiffly around the obsidian table, their eyes sharp, their expressions carved from judgment, and at the far end stood Soulin Ward, arms crossed, lips curved into a smile that tasted like victory long before it was earned. "Damian," she said smoothly, "you're late. We were just about to proceed without you." "No," Damian replied, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority that silenced the room instantly. "You weren't." He guided Aria to stand beside him, publicly, visibly, deliberately, before placing a single folder on the table with a precision that made Soulin's smile falter. "Before we begin this vote," Damian said, "the board deserves the truth. All of it." Soulin laughed softly. "We already know the truth. You entered a contract marriage for personal gain. That alone is grounds for removal." "You know your version of the truth," Damian corrected. And then he opened the folder. Aria watched the room shift, postures straightening, gazes narrowing, murmurs rising, as Damian revealed document after document. Email chains, financial inconsistencies, communication logs linking Soulin to an outside investor known for hostile takeovers. "You orchestrated the leak," Damian said, each word clean and cold. "You hoped the scandal would destabilize this company long enough for your partner to force a buyout. But unfortunately for you, you underestimated the woman standing beside me." Soulin's eyes snapped to Aria. "She's nobody. She's the reason I caught your trail," Damian said. "She's the reason I stopped you." Gasps rippled across the table. Soulin stepped forward, fury breaking through her polished exterior. "This is absurd. You're grasping at straws." But Harold entered then, placing a final document in front of the board, security footage, timestamps, recorded calls. Soulin went still. The room did too. When the chairman finally spoke, his voice held no softness. "Soulin Ward, you are hereby removed from your position pending legal action." Soulin's mask cracked, rage twisting her features as she backed away. "You'll regret this," she hissed at Damian. Then she turned her venom on Aria. "And you don't think this makes you worthy." Damian stepped between them without hesitation. "She doesn't need your approval. She has mine." Soulin was escorted out, her heels striking sharp, angry notes against the marble floor until the sound disappeared down the hall. When the room finally emptied, leaving only Damian, Aria, and the fading tension of a battle won, Aria exhaled a shaking breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You saved the company," she whispered. "No," Damian corrected gently, turning toward her. "We saved it." Aria felt her heart stutter. "Damian, I meant what I said," he murmured, stepping closer. "I choose you, not because of the contract, not because of the chaos, but because somewhere along the way, you became the one person I can't lose." Her throat tightened. "And what if choosing me cost you everything?" He reached for her hand, slow, reverent, as if it were something precious. "Then it's a cost I'll pay every time." The morning sun poured through the tall boardroom windows, framing them in warm light, softening every sharp edge the past days had carved into their lives. For the first time since the contract was signed, Aria let herself step forward, into him, into the truth, into what this had become. Damian lifted her chin gently. "Aria Wynn Cross," he whispered, the name carrying a softness she'd never heard from him before. "Will you stay? Without papers, without rules, without fear." Her eyes stung with something warm, overwhelming. "Damian," she breathed, "I'm not going anywhere." He smiled then, slow, real, breathtaking, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Trust me," he whispered. "This time, not just tonight." And with her hands wrapped in his, her heart steady for the first time in days, Aria whispered back the words that would rewrite everything. "I do."